It was a cold, foggy night in the small town of Crestwood, the kind of night where the streetlights barely cut through the mist, and every shadow seemed to hold a secret. In the heart of the town, Crestwood General Hospital stood quiet, its fluorescent lights humming softly in the empty halls. At 2:17 a.m., a young girl named Aaliyah Thompson, just 16 years old, vanished from her hospital bed without a trace. No one saw her leave. No one heard a sound. Her chart was still clipped to the bed, her 4 bags still dripping, but Aaliyah was gone. The hospital staff was baffled, the police were stumped, and her family was left shattered, clinging to questions that had no answers. For 2 years, her disappearance haunted Crestwood, a wound that refused to heal. Then, one rainy afternoon, a sewer crew working in the Canal system just outside town found something that turned the mystery upside down, a discovery so chilling it sent shivers through the entire community. What they pulled from those dark, murky waters wasn't just evidence, it was a clue to a story far bigger than anyone could have imagined. But before we dive into that, let me take you back to where it all began, to a moment so small, so human, it's hard to believe it could spark a chain of events this wild. Aaliyah wasn't just any teenager. She was the kind of person who lit up a room without even trying. With her warm smile and quick laugh, she had a way of making people feel seen, like they mattered. Growing up in Crestwood, a town where everybody knew everybody, Aaliyah was a star in her own quiet way. She was a straight-A student, a track runner who could outpace anyone at her school, and the kind of daughter who'd spend her weekends helping her mom, Denise, at the local food bank. But what stood out most about Aaliyah was her heart. She was the girl who'd give you her jacket if you were cold, who'd share her lunch if you forgot yours. And that's exactly what happened on the day everything started to unravel. It was a crowded bus ride home from school, the kind where you're lucky to find a seat. Aaliyah, tired from a long day, was sitting near the back when she noticed a pregnant woman struggling to stand as the bus lurched through traffic. Without a second thought, Aaliyah stood up, offered her seat, and smiled. The woman, a stranger with tired eyes and a grateful nod, sat down and scribbled something on a piece of paper. She pressed it into Aaliyah's hand and said, "You don't know what this means to me." Aaliyah didn't think much of it at the time, just a kind gesture, a fleeting moment. But that note, those few words scrawled in haste, would change her life forever. The note wasn't just a thank you. It was something else entirely, something cryptic, something that didn't make sense at first glance. Aaliyah tucked it into her pocket, planning to read it later, but life got in the way. That night, she started feeling off, dizzy, weak, her chest tight. By midnight, her mom rushed her to Crestwood General, where doctors diagnosed a sudden, unexplained illness. Aaliyah was admitted, hooked up to monitors, and told to rest. Her mom stayed by her side, holding her hand, promising everything would be okay. But sometime between the nurse's last check at 1:45 a.m. and the next at 2:30 a.m., Aaliyah disappeared. Her shoes were still under the bed. Her phone was still on the nightstand. The hospital security cameras showed nothing. No one coming in, no one going out. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. The police searched every inch of Crestwood. Volunteers combed the woods, the riverbanks, the abandoned lots. Flyers with Aaliyah's face were plastered on every street corner, but no leads turned up. Her mom, Denise, refused to give up, spending every waking moment chasing answers, clinging to the hope that her daughter was still out there. The town rallied around her, but as weeks turned to months and months to years, hope started to fade. For 2 years, Aaliyah's disappearance was the mystery that defined Crestwood. People whispered about it at the diner, at church, at the grocery store. Some thought she'd run away, maybe overwhelmed by something no one knew about. Others wondered if someone had taken her, though no one could imagine who or why. The police had no suspects, no evidence, no trace. Aaliyah's case went cold, filed away in a box of unsolved mysteries. But then, on a dreary October day, a sewer crew was clearing debris from the canal system that ran beneath the town. It was routine work, the kind no one thinks twice about. Until one of the workers spotted something caught in the grate, a small, tattered object that didn't belong. At first, they thought it was just trash. But when they pulled it out, their faces went pale. It was a piece of clothing, unmistakably Aaliyah's, a bracelet she'd worn every day, one her mom had given her for her 10th birthday. How did it end up there, in the dark, forgotten tunnels of the Canal system? And what did it mean? Was Aaliyah still out there, or was this a clue to something far darker? That discovery sent shockwaves through Crestwood. The police reopened the case, and suddenly, everyone was talking about Aaliyah again. But the bracelet wasn't the only thing they found. Deep in the canal, hidden in a place no one would think to look, was something else, something that tied back to that note Aaliyah had been given on the bus. That simple act of kindness, giving up her seat for a pregnant woman, had set something in motion, something no one could have predicted. What was in that note? Who was the woman on the bus? And how did a moment of compassion lead to a mystery that would unravel secrets buried deep in Crestwood shadows? The answers are coming, but they're not what you expect. Stick with me, because this story is just getting started, and the truth is stranger than anything you can imagine. The rain was still falling in Crestwood, a steady drizzle that turned the streets slick and the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. The discovery in the canal system had ripped open old wounds, and the town was buzzing with questions no one could answer. Aaliyah's bracelet, found tangled in the rusty grate of the canal, wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a lifeline to a girl who'd vanished without a trace. For her mom, Denise, it was a spark of hope, but also a new kind of torment. How had it ended up there? Had Aaliyah been in those tunnels? Or had someone else placed it there to throw everyone off? The police were tight-lipped, saying only that they were investigating, but the whispers around town were growing louder. People couldn't stop talking about the note. The one Aaliyah had gotten on the bus that day, the one her best friend, Kayla, said she'd been clutching like it was a secret she couldn't share. That note was starting to feel like the key to everything, but no one knew where it was. It hadn't been in Aaliyah's hospital room, her backpack, or her pockets when she disappeared. It was as gone as she was, and that made it all the more mysterious. Denise Thompson sat in her small living room, surrounded by photos of Aaliyah, her 10th birthday with that bracelet glinting on her wrist, her track meets with a grin that could melt anyone's heart, her helping at the food bank with her sleeves rolled up. Denise hadn't slept properly in 2 years, not since the night her daughter vanished. She'd spent every day since then chasing leads that went nowhere, talking to anyone who might know something, even knocking on doors of strangers who'd posted about Aaliyah online. The bracelet's discovery had brought her back to the police station, sitting across from Detective Harris, a man who'd been kind at first, but now looked at her with tired eyes. "We're doing everything we can," he'd said, but Denise wasn't buying it. She'd heard that line too many times. That bracelet was hers, she told him, her voice shaking. She never took it off. "You need to tell me what else you found down there." But Harris wouldn't say. He just promised they were following every lead, and that only made Denise's stomach twist tighter. She knew there was more to this, something the police weren't sharing. And she couldn't shake the feeling that it all tied back to that moment on the bus, to the woman who'd handed Aaliyah that note. Let's rewind a bit, to that day on the bus, because that's where the threads of this story start to tangle. Aaliyah had been coming home from school, her backpack heavy with books and her mind on the track meet she had the next day. The bus was packed, standing room only, and she was lucky to snag a seat near the back. She was scrolling through her phone, half listening to music, when she noticed the woman standing a few feet away. She was older, maybe in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back and a face that looked worn, like she'd been carrying too much for too long. Her hands rested on her pregnant belly, and she swayed slightly as the bus hit a bump. Aaliyah didn't hesitate. She stood up, tapped the woman's arm, and said, "Here, take my seat." The woman's eyes softened, and she sat down with a quiet, "Thank you." Aaliyah stood in the aisle, holding the overhead bar, thinking nothing of it. It was just what she did, help out, be kind, no big deal. But then, just before the woman got off at her stop, she pulled out a small piece of paper, scribbled something quickly, and pressed it into Aaliyah's hand. "You're a good person," she said, her voice low, almost urgent. "Keep this safe." Aaliyah nodded, confused but polite, and slipped the note into her pocket. She didn't read it right away. She was too caught up in her day, her plans, her life. But later, when she showed it to Kayla, her best friend, she said it felt important, like it meant something she couldn't quite figure out. Kayla was the one person Aaliyah told everything to. They'd been friends since 3rd grade, the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences and knew each other's secrets. Kayla was at the hospital that night, sitting with Aaliyah before her mom arrived, trying to keep her spirits up. She'd seen the note when Aaliyah pulled it out to show her, but it wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a thank you or a phone number or anything normal. It was a string of words that didn't make sense, something about a place, a time, and a name Kayla didn't recognize. It's like a code or something, Aaliyah had said, laughing it off, but Kayla could tell she was spooked. Maybe it's nothing, Kayla had replied, but she wasn't so sure. When Aaliyah disappeared just hours later, Kayla couldn't stop thinking about that note. She told the police about it, but without the actual paper, they didn't take it seriously. Kids get notes all the time, one officer had said, brushing it off. But Kayla knew better. Aaliyah wasn't the type to make things up or get caught up in drama. That note meant something, and now, with the bracelet turning up in the canal, Kayla was starting to wonder if she should have pushed harder to figure it out. The canal system in Crestwood wasn't just some forgotten network of pipes. It was old, sprawling, and mostly abandoned, a maze of tunnels that snaked under the town and out toward the river. Built decades ago for drainage, it had become a place where kids dared each other to explore, where graffiti covered the walls, and where secrets could stay hidden forever. The sewer crew hadn't been looking for anything special that day, just clearing out leaves and debris after a big storm. But when they found Aaliyah's bracelet, it wasn't alone. There was something else, something the police weren't talking about publicly yet. Rumors were starting to leak out, though, whispered in the diner and texted between neighbors. Some said it was a piece of paper, waterlogged but still legible, with writing that looked eerily similar to the note Aaliyah had described to Kayla. Others said it was something more personal, something that proved Aaliyah had been down there, or that someone had wanted it to look that way. The police had cordoned off the canal entrance, and divers were seen going in, their flashlights cutting through the dark water. Whatever they were looking for, they weren't saying, and that silence was driving Denise crazy. Denise wasn't the only one feeling the weight of it all. The whole town was on edge. Crestwood was the kind of place where nothing big ever happened, until Aaliyah. Her disappearance had shaken everyone, and now the canal discovery was stirring up old fears and new questions. People started locking their doors at night, something they'd never bothered with before. Parents kept a closer eye on their kids, and the high school track team, where Aaliyah had been a star, held a vigil that drew half the town. But it wasn't just grief pulling people together. It was suspicion. Who was the woman on the bus? Why had she given Aaliyah that note? And why was the bracelet in the canal, of all places? Some folks thought the woman might have been a drifter, someone passing through who'd targeted Aaliyah for reasons no one could guess. Others wondered if it was someone local, someone hiding in plain sight. Crestwood wasn't a big town, but it had its secrets. Old grudges, quiet scandals, people who kept to themselves a little too much. And Aaliyah's act of kindness, that simple gesture on a crowded bus, was starting to feel like the spark that had ignited something dangerous. Kayla couldn't sit still anymore. She was 17 now, a year older than Aaliyah had been when she vanished, and the guilt of not doing more back then was eating her alive. She'd always felt like she'd let her friend down, like she should have stayed at the hospital longer or pushed Aaliyah to figure out what the note meant. Now, with the bracelet turning up, she felt like she had a second chance to make things right. She started digging, asking questions around town, talking to people who'd been on the bus that day. Most didn't remember anything, but one old man, a regular on that route, said something that stuck with her. He remembered the woman Aaliyah had helped, not her face, but the way she'd acted. She was nervous, he said, scratching his beard. Kept looking over her shoulder, like she was scared of something. And she was in a hurry to get off, like she didn't want to be seen. Kayla's heart raced when she heard that. Nervous? Scared?
Why?
And why give Aaliyah a note at all? Kayla didn't have the answers, but she was determined to find them, even if it meant sneaking into places she shouldn't or asking questions that made people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Denise was chasing her own leads. She'd started visiting the canal system at night, standing by the locked gate, staring into the darkness like it might give her answers. She didn't tell anyone, not even Kayla, but she'd been doing her own research, piecing together what she could about the tunnels. She'd found old town records that showed the canal system connected to places it shouldn't, abandoned buildings, forgotten storage rooms, even a few private properties. It was a network that could hide anything or anyone. Denise wasn't a detective, but she was a mom, and that made her relentless. She started to wonder if Aaliyah had stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to, maybe because of that note. Had the woman on the bus been trying to warn her? Or was it something else, something that had pulled Aaliyah into a world she didn't belong in? Denise didn't know, but she wasn't going to stop until she did. The police, for their part, were moving slower than anyone liked. Detective Harris and his team were combing through the canal, but they weren't sharing much. A few reporters from the local paper tried to get answers, but all they got were vague statements about ongoing investigations. That didn't sit well with the town, especially not with people like Mr. Jenkins, the high school history teacher who'd known Aaliyah since she was a kid. He'd been one of her biggest cheerleaders, always telling her she could do anything she set her mind to. Now, he was starting to ask questions of his own, poking around in places the police hadn't. He'd heard rumors about strange activity near the canal system before Aaliyah disappeared. Late-night deliveries, unmarked vans, people coming and going from the old warehouse district. He didn't have proof, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Aaliyah's disappearance was tied to something bigger, something the town didn't want to face. As the days passed, the tension in Crestwood grew thicker. The bracelet was just the beginning, a thread that was unraveling a tapestry of secrets. Kayla kept digging, Denise kept searching, and the police kept their cards close. But the note, the one Aaliyah had gotten on that bus, was still out there, somewhere, and it held answers no one could yet see. What had the woman written? Why had Aaliyah vanished hours later? And what was hiding in the shadows of Crestwood's canal system, waiting to be found? The truth was closer than anyone realized, but it was buried deep, and getting to it would mean facing things no one in Crestwood was ready for. The story was far from over, and the next piece of the puzzle was about to change everything. The rain hadn't let up in Crestwood, turning the streets into a maze of puddles and the canal system into a swollen, murky beast. The discovery of Aaliyah's bracelet had set the town on edge, but it was the whispers of what else the sewer crew found that kept people up at night. The police were still tight-lipped, but word was spreading. Something else had been pulled from the canal, something they weren't ready to share. Kayla couldn't stop thinking about it. She sat in her bedroom, scrolling through old texts from Aaliyah, her thumb hovering over a photo of them at last year's track meet, both of them laughing, Aaliyah's bracelet catching the sunlight. Kayla's chest ached. She'd been digging for answers, talking to anyone who might remember that day on the bus, but every lead felt like a dead end. Still, she couldn't shake the old man's words about the woman Aaliyah had helped. Nervous, scared, like she was running from something. Kayla wondered if that woman was the key, not just to the note, but to everything. She decided to take a risk, sneaking out after dinner to check the bus stop where the woman had gotten off, hoping for a clue, any clue that might point her in the right direction. Meanwhile, Denise was wrestling with her own demons. She'd started mapping out the canal system, using old blueprints she'd found in the town library's dusty archives. The tunnels were a labyrinth, connecting places no one thought about anymore, an old factory, a boarded-up storage shed, even the basement of a house on the edge of town owned by a man no one really knew. His name was Elias Carter, a quiet loner who'd moved to Crestwood a few years back. He kept himself, worked odd jobs, and never caused trouble, but Denise's gut told her he was worth looking into. She remembered seeing him at the diner once, staring at his coffee like it held secrets. When she mentioned his name to Detective Harris, he brushed it off, saying Elias was just a recluse, no record, no reason to suspect him. But Denise wasn't convinced. She started watching his house at night, parked across the street, her heart pounding every time a light flickered in his windows. She didn't know what she was looking for, but the bracelet in the canal and the note from the bus were pieces of a puzzle, and she was starting to think Elias might be holding one. Across town, Mr. Jenkins, the history teacher, was chasing his own thread. He'd always been curious, the kind of guy who read old newspapers for fun and knew more about Crestwood's past than most. After the bracelet turned up, he started digging into the town's history, focusing on the canal system. He found stories from decades ago, rumors of smuggling, shady deals, things hidden in those tunnels that no one talked about anymore. The more he read, the more he wondered if Aaliyah's disappearance was tied to something bigger, something that had been buried under Crestwood for years. He started asking questions at the town hall, poking around in records that hadn't been touched in ages. One night, he found a file about an old warehouse near the canal, shut down in the 90s after some kind of investigation. The details were vague, but there were names. People who'd worked there, people who'd vanished from Crestwood around the same time. One name stood out, Margaret Holt, a woman who'd left town abruptly, no explanation, no trace. Jenkins couldn't help but wonder if she was the woman from the bus, the one who'd given Aaliyah the note. It was a long shot, but he couldn't let it go. Kayla's trip to the bus stop didn't turn up much at first. It was just a corner with a rusted sign and a bench covered in graffiti, nothing special. But as she stood there, kicking at the gravel, she noticed something tucked under the bench, a crumpled piece of paper, half soaked from the rain. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up, careful not to tear it. It wasn't the note Aaliyah had gotten. It was too new, the ink still sharp. But the words on it were strange, a jumble of letters and numbers that reminded her of what Aaliyah had described. Kayla stuffed it in her pocket, her mind racing. Was this a coincidence? Or was someone still leaving clues? She didn't know who to trust with it, not the police, who dismissed her before, and not her parents, who'd tell her to stay out of it. She decided to show it to Mr. Jenkins, the only person who seemed to take her seriously. When she did, his eyes widened. "This looks like a cipher," he said, adjusting his glasses. Like something meant to be decoded. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he promised to help her figure it out, even if it meant staying up all night. While Kayla and Jenkins worked on the cipher, Denise's obsession with Elias Carter was growing. She'd started following him, discreetly at first, just noting where he went, grocery store, gas station, the diner. But one night, she saw him drive to the edge of town, near the canal entrance, and sit in his car for an hour, just staring at the gate. Her pulse raced as she watched from a distance, hidden behind a tree. What was he doing there? Was he involved, or was she just desperate for answers? She wanted to confront him, but something held her back. Fear, maybe, or the nagging feeling that she was getting too close to something dangerous. Instead, she started asking around quietly about Elias. Most people didn't know much, but one woman at the food bank, Mrs. Carter, no relation, mentioned something odd. She said Elias had been seen talking to a woman a few years back, someone who matched the description of the pregnant woman on the bus. It was a small detail, but it hit Denise like a lightning bolt. Could Elias know her? Could he be connected to Aaliyah's disappearance? The police, meanwhile, were dealing with their own problems. Detective Harris was under pressure from the town council to give answers, but the canal search wasn't going as planned. The divers had found more than just the bracelet, a small bag, waterlogged and torn, with papers inside that were too damaged to read. But there was something else, something they hadn't told anyone. A key, old and rusted, with a tag that had a single word scratched into it. Holt. Harris didn't know what it meant, but it was enough to make him pull the old warehouse file Jenkins had been looking into. The name Margaret Holt was there, just like Jenkins had found, tied to a case that had been closed without much explanation. Harris didn't believe in coincidences, but he wasn't ready to jump to conclusions either. He sent the key to the lab, hoping for fingerprints or DNA, but the wait was killing him. And the longer they waited, the more the town's patience wore thin. People were starting to show up at the station, demanding answers, and Harris knew he couldn't keep them in the dark much longer. Kayla and Jenkins spent hours on the cipher, scribbling notes and trying different codes. It was slow work, and Kayla was frustrated, but Jenkins kept her focused. "This could be important," he said, his voice steady. "Aaliyah would have wanted you to keep going." That was enough to keep Kayla at it, even when her eyes burned from staring at the paper. They figured out it wasn't just a random string of letters, it was a message, but it needed a key to unlock it. Jenkins thought it might be a book cipher, where the numbers pointed to pages or lines in a specific book. But which one? Kayla remembered Aaliyah loved reading, always carrying around some old novel from the library. She wondered if the answer was in one of those books, maybe one Aaliyah had with her that day. She decided to check the hospital, see if anything had been left behind in Aaliyah's room. It was a long shot, but she was running out of options. Denise, meanwhile, was taking bigger risks. She'd gotten a hold of Elias's work schedule. He did maintenance at the old warehouse district sometimes, and decided to follow him there one night. The warehouse was creepy, all rusted metal and broken windows, the kind of place that felt like it was watching you. She saw Elias go inside, carrying a flashlight, and her heart pounded as she crept closer. She didn't go in. She wasn't that reckless, but she peeked through a cracked window and saw him moving boxes, like he was looking for something. Or hiding something. She couldn't tell, but it was enough to make her wonder if the canal wasn't the only place holding secrets. She took a photo with her phone, blurry but clear enough to show Elias in a warehouse, and sent it to Kayla. "Don't tell anyone," she texted, "but we need to talk." The town was starting to feel like a pressure cooker, with everyone chasing their own piece of the truth. Kayla was piecing together the cipher. Denise was tailing Elias, and Jenkins was digging into Crestwood's past. The police were holding on to that key, hoping it would unlock more than just a door. And somewhere out there, the woman from the bus, whoever she was still a ghost, her note the thread that tied it all together. What had she written that was so important? Why had Aaliyah vanished hours later? And what was waiting in the canal system, or the warehouse, or wherever the truth was hiding? Every answer led to more questions, and the deeper they went, the darker it got. Crestwood wasn't ready for what was coming, but the truth was closing in, and it wasn't going to stay buried much longer. The air in Crestwood felt heavier now, like the town itself was holding its breath. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, casting a gray pall over the streets. Kayla's hands shook as she clutched the cipher she'd found under the bus stop bench. Its cryptic letters and numbers burned into her mind. She and Mr. Jenkins had spent hours trying to crack it, but they were still missing something. A key, a book, a clue that would make it all click. Kayla had snuck into the hospital the night before, slipping past the night guard to check Aaliyah's old room. It was empty now, sterile and cold, but under the bed, tucked in a corner, she found a dog-eared copy of The Outsiders, Aaliyah's favorite book. Her heart raced as she flipped through it, hoping it held the answer to the cipher, but the pages were clean. No notes, no underlines, nothing. Still, she took it home, convinced it was important. As she sat in her room, staring at the book and the cipher side by side, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was close, closer than anyone else, to unraveling what had happened to her best friend. But close wasn't enough, and the clock was ticking. Denise was on her own mission, her nerves frayed from nights spent watching Elias Carter. The photo she'd taken of him in the warehouse was blurry, but it was enough to keep her up at night, wondering what he was doing in there. She'd started to notice things about him, how he never looked anyone in the eye, how he always seemed to be somewhere near the canal system, like he was guarding it. She'd gone back to the warehouse district twice since that night, hiding in the shadows, watching for any sign of him. Last night, she'd seen something that made her blood run cold, a light flickering deep inside the warehouse, moving like someone was carrying it through the dark. It wasn't Elias. She'd seen his car parked at his house, but it was someone, and that was enough to make her think the warehouse was more than just an abandoned building. She wanted to tell Detective Harris, but she didn't trust him to act fast enough. Instead, she called Kayla, her voice low and urgent. "I'm going in tomorrow night," she said. "I need you to come with me. We can't wait anymore." Kayla hesitated, her stomach twisting, but she agreed. Aaliyah deserved that much. Mr. Jenkins was chasing his own ghosts. The file on Margaret Holt had opened a door he hadn't expected. She wasn't just some woman who'd left Crestwood. She'd been part of something shady, something tied to the old warehouse and the canal system. The records were vague, but Jenkins found mentions of late-night deliveries, crates that were never logged, and a few names that kept popping up, including Elias Carter's. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to make Jenkins uneasy. He'd started carrying a small notebook, jotting down every detail he uncovered, and he'd taken to locking his classroom door at night while he worked. Last night, he'd found something else, a newspaper clipping from 20 years ago about a missing person, a young woman who'd worked at the warehouse and vanished without a trace. Her name wasn't Margaret, but the story felt too familiar, too close to Aaliyah's. Jenkins didn't believe in coincidences, and he was starting to think Crestwood's secrets went deeper than anyone wanted to admit. He called Kayla, telling her about the clipping, and said, "We need to be careful. Whoever's behind this, they're still out there." The police weren't sitting still either, but Detective Harris was feeling the pressure. The key they'd found in the canal, the one with Holt scratched into it, had come back from the lab with no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. But it was older than Aaliyah's disappearance, and that made Harris wonder if they were dealing with something that had been brewing in Crestwood for years. He'd started digging into Elias Carter, despite his earlier dismissal of Denise's suspicions. Elias had no record, but he'd been in town when Margaret Holt disappeared, and he'd worked at the warehouse back then. Harris didn't have enough to bring him in, but he put a tail on him, hoping Elias would slip up. Meanwhile, the divers were still searching the canal, pulling up more fragments, bits of cloth, a rusted tool, a piece of paper with faded ink that might have been part of Aaliyah's note. Every find tightened the knot in Harris's chest. He knew the town was watching, waiting for answers, and he was running out of time to give them. Kayla couldn't sleep. The cipher, the book, the photo from Denise, it was all swirling in her head, pulling her deeper into a mystery she wasn't sure she could handle. She kept thinking about Aaliyah, about the last time they'd talked in the hospital. Aaliyah had been scared, not just about being sick, but about something else, something she wouldn't say. "That note," she'd whispered. "It's weird, Kayla. It's like, it's not meant for me." Kayla hadn't known what to make of it then, but now it felt like a warning. She decided to try the cipher with the outsiders one more time, using the numbers as page and line references. Her hands trembled as she worked, and then, like a lock clicking open, a message started to form. "Meet at the gate. Midnight. Holt." Her breath caught. The gate? The canal gate? And Holt, Margaret Holt? It was too much to process, but it was something, and she wasn't letting it go. She called Jenkins, reading him the message, and he went quiet for a long moment. "Kayla," he finally said, "you can't tell anyone about this. Not yet. We need to know what we're walking into." Denise was already planning her move. She'd bought a flashlight and a crowbar, hiding them in her car. She didn't tell Kayla everything, just that they were going to the warehouse to look for answers. But in her heart, Denise was ready for anything. She'd spent 2 years imagining the worst, and now, with the bracelet and the rumors about the canal, she was sure Aaliyah had been caught up in something bigger than herself. The note, the woman on the bus, Elias, the warehouse, it all pointed to a truth Denise could almost taste. She didn't know if Aaliyah was still out there, but she knew the warehouse held something, and she wasn't leaving without it. When Kayla showed up at her house, her face pale and her backpack stuffed with the outsiders and the cipher, Denise felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want to drag Kayla into this, but she couldn't do it alone. "We stick together," she told her, gripping her hand. "Whatever we find, we face it together." The night was dark, the kind of dark that swallowed sound and light. Denise and Kayla parked a block from the warehouse, their footsteps muffled by the damp grass. The canal gate was nearby, its metal bars glinting faintly under the streetlights. Kayla kept glancing at it, the cipher's message, "Meet at the gate. Midnight. Holt," burning in her mind. It was almost midnight now, and the air felt charged, like something was about to break. They crept toward the warehouse, Denise's crowbar heavy in her hand. The building loomed ahead, its windows black and jagged, like eyes watching them. They found a side door, rusted but unlocked, and slipped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the faint drip of water echoed somewhere deep within. Kayla's flashlight beam danced across crates and old machinery, catching glimpses of graffiti and cobwebs. Then they heard a low scrape, like something heavy being moved. Denise froze, her heart hammering. "Someone's here," she whispered. Across town, Jenkins was at his desk, the newspaper clipping about the missing woman spread out in front of him. He'd found another name in the old warehouse records, a man who'd worked with Margaret Holt, someone who'd left Crestwood right after she disappeared. His name was Daniel Reed, and Jenkins had a hunch he was still around, maybe even in town. He'd called an old friend at the county records office, asking for anything on Reed, and was waiting for a call back. But as he sat there, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging." His blood ran cold. He looked around his empty classroom, the windows dark, and locked the door. Whoever sent that message knew what he was doing, and that meant he was closer to the truth than he'd realized. Back at the warehouse, Kayla and Denise moved deeper inside, following the sound of the scrape. The air grew colder, the smell of damp earth stronger, like they were near the canal. Kayla's flashlight caught something, a trapdoor in the floor, partially covered by a crate. Denise's eyes widened. "This could lead to the tunnels," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They pushed the crate aside, the scrape echoing in the silence, and pried open the trapdoor. A dark, narrow staircase led down, the air below thick with the stench of the canal. Kayla's heart pounded, the cipher's words ringing in her ears. "Meet at the gate. Midnight. Holt." It was past midnight now, and they were here, standing on the edge of something they couldn't turn back from. Denise took a step down, her flashlight shaking in her hand, and Kayla followed, her breath shallow. Somewhere in the distance, another sound, a low, deliberate footstep. Someone was down there, waiting. The staircase beneath the warehouse trapdoor was narrow, the air thick with the damp, metallic smell of the canal system. Denise led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but every step felt like a gamble. Kayla followed close behind, clutching the outsiders in her backpack, the cipher's message, "Meet at the gate. Midnight. Holt," looping in her mind like a warning she couldn't ignore. The footsteps they'd heard echoed again, faint but deliberate, somewhere deeper in the tunnel. Denise's hand tightened on the crowbar, her knuckles pale. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice steady, but her eyes wide with fear. Kayla nodded, her heart hammering so loud she was sure it would give them away. The tunnel walls were slick with moss, and the faint drip of water mingled with the sound of their shallow breaths. They were in the belly of Crestwood's secrets now, and whatever was waiting down here wasn't going to let them leave easily. As they descended, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber, and Kayla's flashlight caught something that made her freeze, a faint outline on the wall, scratched into the concrete. It was a symbol, a circle with a jagged line through it, and it looked eerily familiar, like something she'd seen in Aaliyah's notebook years ago. Back in town, Mr. Jenkins was still reeling from the text. "Stop digging." His hands shook as he double-checked the lock on his classroom door, the newspaper clipping about the missing woman crumpled on his desk. He tried calling the number back, but it was disconnected, a burner phone, no trace. Whoever sent it knew he was getting close, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. He'd spent the last hour piecing together what he'd found about Daniel Reed, the man who'd worked with Margaret Holt at the warehouse. Reed hadn't just left Crestwood after her disappearance. He'd vanished, no forwarding address, no record. But Jenkins had a lead, a grainy photo from an old town event, showing Reed standing next to Elias Carter, both of them near the canal gate. It was a long shot, but it was enough to make Jenkins think Elias wasn't just a loner. He was part of something bigger. He grabbed his notebook and headed for his car, determined to warn Kayla and Denise, but as he stepped outside, he saw a shadow move across the school parking lot. His stomach dropped. Someone was watching him. In the tunnel, Denise and Kayla crept forward, the symbol on the wall burning into Kayla's memory. She didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a marker, a sign that they were in the right place or the wrong one. The chamber was larger than they'd expected, with rusted pipes snaking along the ceiling and crates stacked haphazardly in the corners. The air was colder here, and the faint hum of something mechanical vibrated through the floor. Denise's flashlight swept across the crates, catching a glimpse of something that made her stop. A small, tattered piece of fabric caught on a nail, the same bright blue as the jacket Aaliyah had been wearing the day she disappeared. Denise's breath hitched, and she reached for it, her fingers trembling. "This is hers," she whispered, her voice breaking. Kayla's eyes widened, but before she could say anything, the footsteps came again, closer now, deliberate, like someone was circling them in the dark. Denise spun around, her crowbar raised, but the flashlight beam found nothing but shadows. "Who's there?" she called, her voice echoing off the walls. No answer, just the drip of water and the thud of their own heartbeats. Kayla's mind raced. The cipher, the book, the symbol, the jacket, it was all connected, but how? She pulled the outsiders from her backpack, flipping to the page the cipher had pointed to, hoping for something, anything, to make sense. That's when she saw it, a faint pencil mark in the margin, one she hadn't noticed before. It was the same symbol from the wall, scribbled next to a line about running away, about hiding where no one could find you. Her stomach twisted. Had Aaliyah left this as a clue? Or had someone else marked it, knowing she'd been here? Before she could show Denise, a low creak came from the far side of the chamber, and a sliver of light spilled in as a hidden door cracked open. Kayla grabbed Denise's arm, pulling her behind a crate. They crouched low, barely breathing, as a figure stepped into the chamber. It wasn't Elias. It was a woman, her silhouette sharp against the dim light, her steps slow and cautious. She was holding something, a small box no bigger than a shoebox, and she moved like she was scared of being caught. Denise's eyes narrowed, her grip on the crowbar tightening. She didn't know who this woman was, but she looked familiar, like someone she'd seen in passing years ago. Could it be the woman from the bus, the one who'd given Aaliyah the note? The woman stopped, her head tilting as if she'd heard something, and Kayla's heart stopped. If she turned their way, they'd be spotted. But then the woman knelt by one of the crates, prying it open with a small tool. Inside was a stack of papers, and as she rifled through them, a single sheet fell to the ground. Kayla's eyes locked on it. It was the same kind of paper as the cipher, the same hurried handwriting. Denise saw it too, and for a moment, they locked eyes, both knowing they were inches from something huge. But before they could move, the woman stood, clutching the box, and slipped back through the hidden door, the light vanishing with her. The chamber fell silent again, but the air felt electric, like a storm was about to break. Above ground, Detective Harris was in his office, staring at a report that had just come in. The lab had managed to salvage part of the faded paper from the Canal, and it wasn't just any paper, it was a fragment of a note, with the same cipher-like writing Kayla had described. The words were incomplete, but one stood out. Holt. Harris's jaw tightened. Margaret Holt again. He'd pulled every record he could find on her, and what he'd uncovered was unsettling. She hadn't just worked at the warehouse. She'd been part of a group, a network of people moving things through Crestwood's canal system, things no one was supposed to know about. The case had been shut down years ago, the evidence conveniently lost, but Harris was starting to think it had never really ended. And now, with Aaliyah's bracelet and this note, it was clear her disappearance was tangled up in it. He grabbed his keys, ready to head to the canal, when his phone buzzed. It was Jenkins, his voice low and urgent. "Harris, I'm being followed. I think I've got something on Reed and Elias. Meet me at the school." But before Harris could respond, the line went dead. Back in the tunnel, Denise and Kayla crept toward the crate where the woman had been. The fallen paper was still there, and Kayla snatched it up, her hands shaking. It was another cipher, but this one had a single clear word: Aaliyah. Denise's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears. "She was here," she whispered, her voice raw. "She was right here." But before they could process it, the footsteps returned, heavier this time, coming from the tunnel they'd entered through. Kayla's flashlight flickered, the battery dying at the worst possible moment, and the chamber plunged into near darkness. Denise pulled her close, her crowbar raised, as the footsteps grew louder. A shadow loomed at the tunnel's mouth, and a man's voice called out, low and calm, but laced with menace. "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't Elias. It was someone else, someone they didn't know, but the weight of his words sent a chill through them both. Kayla clutched the paper, her mind racing. The cipher, the symbol, the jacket, the woman, everything was pointing to this moment, this place, but they were out of time. Harris sped toward the school, his gut telling him Jenkins was in trouble. The streets were empty, the town eerily quiet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in. He didn't know about Denise and Kayla in the tunnel, didn't know about the woman or the box, but he knew the key with Holt scratched into it was the link to everything. And now, with Jenkins's call cut off, he was sure the past was catching up with Crestwood. The canal, the warehouse, the note, it was all part of a web, and Aaliyah had stumbled into it with a single act of kindness. As Denise and Kayla stood frozen in the tunnel, the man's shadow growing closer, and Jenkins's car sat empty in the school parking lot, the truth was clawing its way to the surface. But it wasn't ready to show itself, not yet. The stakes were higher than ever, and Crestwood was about to crack wide open. The tunnel beneath the warehouse was pitch black now, Kayla's flashlight dead, leaving only Denise's faint beam to cut through the suffocating dark. The man's voice, low, calm, and chilling, echoed closer, his shadow looming at the tunnel's mouth. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, and Denise tightened her grip on the crowbar, her body shielding Kayla. Her heart pounded, but she wasn't backing down, not with Aaliyah's name scrawled on the paper in Kayla's hand, not with her daughter's jacket fragment caught on that nail. Kayla's breath was shallow. The cipher's words, "Meet at the gate. Midnight. Holt," mixing with the terror of the moment. They were trapped, cornered in the canal system's hidden chamber, and the man was closing in. But then, a second sound, a sharp clatter from the hidden door the woman had slipped through earlier. The man froze, his head turning toward the noise, and Denise seized the moment. "Run," she hissed, grabbing Kayla's arm and pulling her toward the stairs they'd come down. They stumbled up, their footsteps echoing, as the man shouted after them, his voice sharp with anger. They didn't look back. Above ground, Detective Harris screeched into the school parking lot, his headlights landing on Jenkins's empty car. His stomach dropped. The teacher's phone was off, the text, "Stop digging," still burning in Harris's mind. He drew his gun and moved toward the school, his boots crunching on gravel. Inside, the hallways were dark, but a faint light glowed from Jenkins's classroom. Harris crept closer, his pulse racing, and pushed the door open. Jenkins was there, slumped in his chair, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He was alive but dazed, his notebook open on the desk, pages torn. "They took it," Jenkins muttered, his voice weak. "The clipping about Reed." Harris's jaw tightened. Daniel Reed, the man tied to Margaret Holt, to the warehouse, to Elias Carter. He helped Jenkins to his feet, radioing for backup, but his mind was on the canal. He'd seen the key with Holt scratched into it, the cipher fragment from the water. Everything pointed to the tunnels, and he knew he had to move fast. In the tunnel, Denise and Kayla burst through the trapdoor into the warehouse, gasping for air. The building was silent, but the weight of what they'd seen, the symbol, the jacket, the woman with the box, pressed down on them. Kayla clutched the paper with Aaliyah's name, her hands shaking. "We have to find that woman," she said, her voice urgent. Denise nodded, but her eyes were on the warehouse door. They needed to get out, to tell someone what they'd found, but as they moved toward the exit, headlights swept across the broken windows. A car pulled up outside, its engine cutting off. Denise grabbed Kayla, pulling her behind a stack of crates. The door creaked open, and Elias Carter stepped inside, his face pale and his hands stuffed in his pockets. He wasn't alone. The woman from the tunnel followed, still holding the small box, her eyes darting nervously. "We don't have much time," she whispered to Elias. "They're getting too close." Kayla's breath caught. It was the woman from the bus, the one who'd given Aaliyah the note. Denise's grip on the crowbar tightened, her body coiled, ready to act. Harris was already on his way to the warehouse, Jenkins in the passenger seat, holding a cloth to his head. The teacher was piecing it together, his voice hoarse. Reed and Holt were running something through the canal system, documents, maybe money. Elias was their muscle. Aaliyah, She saw something she wasn't supposed to. Harris's hands gripped the wheel, his mind racing. The note, the bracelet, the key, it all fit. Aaliyah's act of kindness on the bus had put her in the wrong place at the wrong time. The woman, Margaret Holt, hadn't been a random stranger. She'd been desperate, trying to pass a message, a warning, and Aaliyah had paid the price. Harris radioed for more units, his voice sharp. "We're heading to the warehouse district. Suspect is Elias Carter. Possible hostage situation." He didn't know Denise and Kayla were already there, didn't know how close they were to the truth. Inside the warehouse, Denise couldn't hold back any longer. She stepped out from behind the crates, crowbar raised, her voice trembling but fierce. "Where's my daughter?" she demanded. Elias froze, his eyes wide, but Margaret Holt stepped forward, her hands raised, the box still clutched tight. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Aaliyah wasn't supposed to get hurt." Kayla's heart stopped. "What did you do to her?" she shouted, stepping beside Denise. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I was trying to get out," she said. "I gave her the note to warn her, to keep her away. But they found out." Before she could say more, a gunshot cracked through the warehouse, and Margaret stumbled, clutching her side. Elias dove for cover, shouting, "Get down." Denise and Kayla dropped to the floor as another figure emerged from the shadows. Daniel Reed, older now, his face hard and his gun steady. "You talk too much, Margaret," he said, his voice cold. Chaos erupted. Harris's car screeched to a stop outside, his flashlight cutting through the dark as he ran toward the warehouse, backup close behind. Inside, Denise lunged at Reed, her crowbar swinging, but he sidestepped, grabbing Kayla and pressing the gun to her temple. "Back off," he snarled. Denise froze, her eyes locked on Kayla, her mind racing with images of Aaliyah. Margaret, bleeding on the floor, gasped, "The box, that's proof. Everything they did." Kayla's eyes darted to the box, now lying open, papers spilling out, ledgers, names, dates, proof of a smuggling ring that had used Crestwood's canals for years. Aaliyah's name was there, scrawled on a page, marked with the same symbol from the tunnel. Denise's heart shattered, but she held Reed's gaze, her voice steady. "Let her go. Take me instead." Reed smirked, but before he could respond, Harris burst through the door, gun raised. "Drop it, Reed," he shouted. The standoff was electric, every second stretching into eternity. Reed's grip on Kayla tightened, but his eyes flickered toward the box, the evidence that could ruin him. Elias, still crouched behind a crate, made a move, lunging for Reed, but Reed fired again, and Elias collapsed, clutching his leg. Harris didn't flinch, his gun steady, but Reed was desperate now, his plan unraveling. "You don't get it," he spat. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than this town." Kayla, trembling but fierce, stomped on his foot, giving Harris the split second he needed. He fired, and Reed stumbled, the gun slipping from his hand. Kayla broke free, running to Denise, who pulled her close. Harris cuffed Reed, his backup swarming in, but Denise's eyes were on the box, on Aaliyah's name. Margaret, barely conscious, whispered, "She's alive. They moved her. The note was to save her." The warehouse fell silent, the weight of Margaret's words sinking in. Aaliyah was alive. Denise's knees buckled, tears streaming down her face as she clutched Kayla. Harris grabbed the box, flipping through the papers, his face grim. The ledgers detailed years of illegal deals, money, documents, even people moved through the canal system. Aaliyah had seen something that night in the hospital, something tied to the note, and Reed's crew had taken her to keep her quiet. The bracelet, the jacket, they were traces left behind, deliberate or not. Margaret's note had been a desperate attempt to warn Aaliyah, to keep her away from the canal, but it had backfired, pulling her deeper into danger. Harris radioed for a search team, his voice urgent. "She's out there. We need to find her now." Denise and Kayla followed, their hearts pounding with hope and fear, knowing Aaliyah was close but still out of reach. But then came the twist no one saw coming. As Harris's team secured the warehouse, one of the officers found a hidden compartment in the box, a single photo, creased and faded. It showed Aaliyah, alive, standing in a room with bars on the windows, but she wasn't alone. Next to her was Detective Harris, his arm around her shoulders, smiling. The photo was dated a week ago. Denise's breath caught, her eyes locking on Harris, who was still barking orders, unaware of what they'd found. Kayla's hand shook as she held the photo, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" Harris turned, his face paling as he saw it, his gun still in his hand. The air thickened, every eye on him, as the truth hung like a blade. The man leading the search for Aaliyah might be the one keeping her hidden. The climax had arrived, but the story wasn't over, not yet. The warehouse was a frozen tableau, the air thick with betrayal as Denise clutched the photo of Aaliyah and Detective Harris, her hands trembling. Kayla's eyes were wide, locked on Harris, who stood in the center of the chaos, his gun still raised, his face a mask of shock that quickly hardened into something unreadable. The other officers hesitated, their hands hovering near their holsters, unsure who to trust. Reed was cuffed on the floor, blood seeping from his shoulder, while Elias groaned nearby, clutching his leg. Margaret Holt, slumped against a crate, was barely conscious, her breathing shallow as she clutched her side. The photo in Denise's hand was a bombshell, dated just a week ago, showing Aaliyah alive but trapped, and Harris, standing beside her, smiling like he wasn't the man leading the search for her. "What is this?" Denise's voice was raw, cutting through the silence. Harris's eyes flicked to the photo, and for a split second, panic flashed across his face. "Denise, it's not what you think," he started, but Kayla stepped forward, her voice shaking with fury. "Then explain it. Where is she?" The warehouse echoed with her words, and the tension snapped like a taut wire. Harris lowered his gun, his hands raised in surrender, but his eyes darted toward the tunnel entrance, like he was calculating his next move. "I was protecting her," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "Aaliyah saw too much. Reed and his people, they would have killed her if I hadn't stepped in." Denise's heart pounded, torn between hope and rage. Protecting her? Or hiding her? The photo didn't lie. Aaliyah was alive, somewhere, but Harris's role in it was a dark question mark. Before she could demand more, one of the officers, a young woman named Officer Ruiz, stepped forward, her gun trained on Harris. "Drop it, detective," she said, her voice steady. "Now." Harris hesitated, then set his gun on the ground, his shoulders slumping. The other officers moved in, cuffing him as Denise and Kayla watched, their minds reeling. Margaret, struggling to speak, coughed and pointed weakly at the box of papers. "The truth, it's all there," she gasped. "Aaliyah, safe house north of town." Denise's breath caught. A safe house? Was it possible? The officers secured the scene, calling for medics to tend to Margaret and Elias, while Reed was hauled into a squad car, still spitting curses. Denise and Kayla grabbed the box, its papers spilling out, ledgers, maps, names of people tied to a smuggling ring that had used Crestwood's Canal system for decades. Aaliyah's name appeared again and again, linked to a delivery gone wrong, a shipment she'd accidentally witnessed the night she got sick. The note from the bus, from Margaret, had been a desperate attempt to warn her, to keep her away from the canal where Reed's crew operated. But Aaliyah, curious and stubborn, had gone looking, and they'd taken her to silence her. Harris's role was murkier. His name was in the ledgers too, but marked as an informant, someone playing both sides. Denise's hands shook as she read, her mind racing. Had Harris saved Aaliyah, or was he part of the cover-up? There was only one way to find out. She turned to Ruiz, her voice fierce. "She's in a safe house. North of town. We're going now." Ruiz nodded, grabbing a radio to coordinate a search team, but Denise wasn't waiting. She and Kayla ran for her car, the box of papers under her arm, their hearts pounding with a fragile, desperate hope. The drive north was a blur, the dark roads winding through Crestwood's outskirts, past empty fields and skeletal trees. Kayla clutched the photo, staring at Aaliyah's face, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. "She's okay," Kayla whispered, more to herself than Denise. She has to be. Denise didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the road, her mind replaying every moment of the last 2 years, the sleepless nights, the flyers, the endless dead ends. The safe house was a small cabin, tucked in a wooded area near the river, its windows dark and its driveway overgrown. Ruiz and 2 other officers pulled up behind them, their flashlights cutting through the night. Denise didn't wait for permission. She ran to the door, banging on it, calling Aaliyah's name. No answer. Her heart sank, but Kayla, clutching the outsiders, noticed something. A faint symbol scratched into the doorframe, the same circle with a jagged line from the tunnel. She's here, Kayla said, her voice trembling. Denise grabbed her crowbar, prying the door open, and they stepped inside, the air cold and heavy with dust. The cabin was small, sparsely furnished, with a single locked room at the back. Ruiz kicked the door in, and there she was, Aaliyah, sitting on a cot, her eyes wide with shock. She was thinner, her hair longer, but it was her alive, her bracelet gone but her spirit intact. Denise let out a sob, running to her, pulling her into a hug so tight it hurt. Mom, Aaliyah whispered, her voice breaking, and Kayla joined them, tears streaming down her face. The officers checked the cabin, finding no one else, but Aaliyah's story came out in pieces. After she'd gotten sick, she'd slipped out of the hospital to meet someone at the Canal gate, drawn by the note's cryptic message. Reed's crew had grabbed her, but Harris had intervened, hiding her in the safe house to keep her alive. He told her to stay quiet, promising to get her out when it was safe, but weeks turned to months, and she'd started to lose hope. The photo had been his way of proving to Reed she was still under control, a twisted insurance policy. Harris's story unraveled at the station. He'd been working undercover, infiltrating Reed's smuggling ring years ago, but the lines had blurred. He'd taken bribes, looked the other way, until Aaliyah's disappearance forced him to act. He'd hidden her to save her, but he'd kept it from everyone, even his own team, afraid of leaks. His double life had cost him, his career was over, and he faced charges, but he'd kept Aaliyah alive. Margaret Holt, recovering in the hospital, filled in the gaps. She'd been part of the ring too, forced into it by Reed, and had tried to escape by passing the note to Aaliyah, hoping to expose the operation. Instead, it had pulled Aaliyah into the crosshairs. Elias Carter, it turned out, was just a pawn, a hired hand who'd gotten in too deep and couldn't get out. The ledgers named dozens of others, some long gone, some still in Crestwood, and the police were already rounding them up. The town reeled as the truth came out. The Canal system, once just a forgotten network of tunnels, had been a pipeline for smuggling, money, stolen goods, even people hidden under Crestwood's quiet streets. Aaliyah's act of kindness on the bus had set it all in motion, a single gesture that unraveled a decades-old secret. Denise and Aaliyah stayed close, rebuilding their bond, while Kayla became a hero in her own right, her persistence with the cipher cracking the case wide open. Mr. Jenkins, recovering from his attack, went back to teaching, but he kept a copy of the newspaper clipping, a reminder of how close Crestwood had come to losing its soul. The town held a vigil for Aaliyah's return, the high school track field lit up with candles, and for the first time in 2 years, Denise smiled, her daughter's hand in hers. But there was one last twist, a shadow that lingered even as the case closed. A week after Aaliyah came home, Kayla found a new note slipped under her door, written in the same hurried handwriting as the cipher. It was simple, just 3 words, "They're still watching." Her heart raced as she read it, her eyes scanning the street outside her window. The smuggling ring was gone, Reed was in jail, Harris was disgraced, but someone was out there, someone who knew what she'd done. She didn't tell Denise or Aaliyah, she didn't want to scare them, but she kept the note, tucking it into the outsiders next to Aaliyah's old symbol. Crestwood was healing, but its secrets weren't all gone, and Kayla knew she'd have to stay sharp, just in case. The takeaway from Aaliyah's story wasn't just about solving a mystery. It was about the power of kindness, how one small act, giving up a seat on a bus, could ripple through a town, exposing its darkest corners. It was about resilience, about a mother who never gave up, a friend who kept fighting, and a girl who survived against the odds. Crestwood would never be the same, its quiet streets now marked by the truth of what lay beneath. As Aaliyah ran her first lap around the track again, her mom and Kayla cheering from the stands, the town felt a little lighter, a little stronger. But in the back of their minds, they all knew. Some secrets stay buried, and some shadows never leave. For now, though, they had each other, and that was enough.